Creative, challenging, elevated, imaginative, original, insightful, mature, profound, serious, adult. I'm just overflowing with adjectives to describe contemporary popular culture and criticism. I turned on the internet today to find a discussion about the function and purpose of awards in cinema. So just this is a little example from a noted pop culture blogger. Greta and Margot, while it can sting to win the box office but not take home the gold, your millions of fans love you. You're so much more than Kenough. This was from at Hillary Clinton. Should look her up. Should lock her up, indeed. We're optimistic on this podcast. We try to see in the crises of our time some political opportunity, but what we are not is poptimistic. This idea, poptimism, is the notion of treating mainstream pop music and by extension pop culture as weighty, serious, worthy of debate, and above all, respect. Respect because there's millions of fans out there, and as we all know, we must kowtow to the fan.
Milan ou Tripoli, Vilnius ou Benghazi, Paris, Moscou, on fait le bunga, bunga, Bangkok ou Bogota, Le Caire ou Jakarta, Kistabia, on fait le bunga, bunga, Stockholm ou Monaco, ou Montevideo, Oslo, Tokyo, on fait le bunga, bunga.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to BungaCast, the global politics podcast at the end of history. I'm Alex Hochuli in São Paulo, Brazil, as usual. George Hoare is in the glitzy capital of a decaying country, London, England. Hello, George.
Yep. Hi. Good characterization. It is very much decaying. Everything's blowing over in a strong gale here. So, yep.
And Philip Cunliffe is also of this podcast, but he is away today. But today I'm really happy to welcome our guest, Lias Saoudi, who, if you don't know, is a frontman of the British band Fat White Family, co-author of a memoir which came out a couple of years ago called 10,000 Apologies, which I've just finished reading, and I have to say it's a riot. I genuinely laughed out loud at several points. And if you're into kind of a rock memoir, accounts and tales of drugs and success and failure and all the rest of it, I highly recommend you pick it up. And he's also now a writer at Unheard, several interesting searching pieces on there, but all this is linked in the show notes if you want to check it out. Anyway, Lias, welcome.
Howdy. How's it going?
But yeah, very well. I'm excited to. But I've been meaning to do this for a long time. I think we kind of interacted on Instagram a little while ago, and
every now and then a little psyop, you know. But I love the book, by the way. I thought it was great. The end of history.
Yeah, well, so
stuff. You know.
So I was delighted to hear that, and so
Berlusconi as a kind of avant-garde, kind of as a prophecy, you know. But now I see the truth, you know.
Yeah, right. The cult of Berlusconi must go on even after his death. Maybe indeed, especially after his death. Avant-garde. I like that. I don't think we ever use that term with regard to him, but you're right. Avant-garde in a kind of really naff postmodern way. But yeah, no, I was delighted. Obviously, when kind of you got in touch and you'd said you read our book, and I saw Fat White Family back in some festival in Hackney in like 2015. I don't remember too much of it, but no doubt was less inebriated than the band, according to the book anyway. So that's all good and as it should be. Anyway, so maybe I should start there. I don't want to do this. We're a politics podcast. I'm not going to do some kind of try to be a music journalist and do that kind of interview here. But I am going to start with a really naff question, which is that the biographical aspect. In the book, you talk about starting a band to get laid and or famous, which is, again, par for the course and as it should be. Not the case for podcasters, of course. I should be clear. I haven't got either of those things out of this. I want to ask you if you succeeded in your endeavor, but I will ask if you did, especially in light of the fact that the kids are doing less and less drugs and drink by many measures in the UK, in the US, and elsewhere as well. Ask whether you feel you did the right drugs, not the right amount, but the right drugs.
I think, the answer would probably have to be No. I think everything just kind of took its own course, and I don't think there is like a good amount of cocaine. I don't think there is like an optimum kind of, not that I didn't have some good times, but like ultimately it's just so destructive, and you kind of roll along with it for such a long time. Eventually you find yourself kind of just mired in like pure contingency. Suddenly you're kind of approaching middle age, and like everybody left the party a long time ago, but you're still there, and the lights come up, and you're still, and it's kind of embarrassing more than anything else. I think, it's kind of like I've thoroughly shamed myself, and you kind of forget why you started down that road in the first place. I think to get laid is a bit of a broad, certainly to show off. I think there was a deep, deep, deep need for me to show off, probably because of a middle child kind of a thing or something like that. But that was, I had to kind of have that center of attention thing. But I was at art school initially. I was at the Slade when I was 18. I moved from small town Northern Ireland, and I wanted to be an artist, a fine artist. But I immediately kind of developed this chip on my shoulder down there, like everybody was better off, or they were middle class or something. And I wanted to do my art at the pub, I wanted to combine it with my drinking and drugging. I guess that's the root note. I had to be able to work while getting fucked up. I had to merge these two parts of my life. So it was, contingency, but difficult to knock it on the head.
It's very, very contemporary and millennial. You want to get messed up, but you want to remain productive. Keep that productivity up.
You have to keep that productivity. You've got no choice. you gotta do it. But yeah, definitely the wrong drugs a lot of the time. Definitely bad drugs. I mean, just nothing good comes of cocaine abuse, and I think that was a big part of it. I think the other thing, if you're talking about hallucinogenics or ketamine or whatever, I think all of them have kind of a potentially, soul expansive kind of capacity, but cocaine is just the devil. Even heroin has a kind of mystic kind of capacity, but not the sniff, it just fucks everything up.
No, fair enough. And I think, in today's context, I think the secret is out now that the culture is fucked. I mean, I don't think anyone defends contemporary popular culture, which is basically culture as a whole now, unless they're morons or they're paid to be morons. Which is a significant enough body of the population. But as a whole, I think there's at least a sense of disquiet, if not, outright disappointment or even outrage at the kind of outright stupidity and the way that we're treated by cultural producers as stupid, right? And by movie studios and whatever else. And this, I don't know if how this relates to the kind of drug question, because there's, I think, a way of it was so integral, I think, to so much Western kind of popular culture that I wonder if there's some sort of, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, whether the kind of decline in kind of drug taking and or increasingly the use of drugs just to kind of get by rather than for pure hedonism is something that seems to have changed. And I wonder if you find that relates in any way to the kind of monotony and sterility of contemporary culture.
Yeah, I think they're definitely connected in some way. I mean, what's the thing with all that? I think the connection is sort of, you're trying to illuminate something that's essentially unknowable with art, some sort of resonance in the universe, which is not explicit. You're trying to uncover this thing, and you need to establish a new perspective if you're going to crack any new ground. And I guess in that sense, drugs have always been part and parcel with any kind of visionary kind of, psychically kind of expansive kind of, experience that you need to kind of lay something out. And I guess if, like, bringing it back to like productivity, like the pressure's so on, like these spaces where the shadows basically within society where these things can kind of properly malform over time, I would describe it as getting like fungal. You need these kind of dark spaces, and you need to be able to sort of smash your brain one way or the other, you know, so you can kind of just get out of it, desystematize, you know, cut loose, you know. I think there's definitely less space for that. There's less space for like just abject failure, you know, like the game is just a lot harder than it's ever been, you know. I don't know what it's like signing on welfare now, but that's how we all used to operate. You'd work a part-time job on the black, and you'd sign on welfare, and that was how you'd live. I don't know whether it's like that now, but even back then, 15 years ago in London, you could always find some crappy pub to live above, you know, and it didn't feel like the walls were always about to fall in, you know. But I also think it's a kind of thing, I don't know, where you've got like social media, that wasn't quite a thing either, you know, where people are getting their kick out of that. And this is just kind of like blanket homogenization of the inside of people's heads, you know, kind of how like every high street looks the same. The inside of everybody's head has to look the same. And I think it's more to do
Yeah.
with kind of like society, basically our culture begins to resemble like the machine, the kind of digital kind of, so like the nodes, there has to be as little resistance between the nodes as possible, you know, therefore like automatically the machine just turns people, you know, into the same. I guess that was already the case with TV, but it's just like ramped up to this like mad kind of level where it becomes really difficult to have any kind of, not even like insight, but just to stray from one opinion to another, you know.
Yeah.
Does that
I
make
mean,
sense?
just no, that definitely makes sense. I mean, speaking as somebody who grew up in what I think is the UK's number one clone town, so it has the most number of shops on the high street, which you can find elsewhere. So it's in some ways, a nowhere place, Reading specifically.
Mm.
Yeah, this kind of the point that you're making about like productivity, you can see it when people are microdosing. It's kind of, you know, you're taking psychedelics not to kind of have some kind of transgressive, I know not, that's not even the right way to put it, but to have some experience outside of these lines you've delimited for yourself. It's like
Mm.
experimenting within these very kind of small boundaries, I guess. And that's, you know, that kind of I think you put in the unheard piece this spirit of willful abrasion, like this
Yeah,
idea that like you're gonna kind of take something that's there and push it further than you should, and kind of, you know, there might be some
yeah,
consequences to your psyche or like your short-term health or long-term health in doing this, but you're going to try and, I don't know, destroy it a little bit. That seems really, like you were saying, because of social media, in part because of, you know, the weight of needing to, I guess, conform, which has always been there but maybe is stronger today. It seems really hard to imagine where this kind of space is to get fungal for young people.
yeah.
I don't know. It seems it's easy to be kind of older and conservative about this stuff as we all get older, but like, is there this space to get kind of, I don't
I
know,
think
to experience separation?
I like I mean, this is the thing. I don't want to sound kind of like, you know, like I'm pouring scorn on the kids or whatever, but I certainly don't see it in like indie rock and roll and in the genre
No.
from which I've kind of grown out of. I think that has become professionalized and gentrified, you know, for want of a less kind of
Mm.
generic term, you know. I think it's become, yeah, something that people do kind of, yeah, professionally, you know. And that thing where it's like you establish this arbitrary quest, you know, you basically you paint yourself into a corner, and then that's, you know, you have to, you know, how good are you at your thing, you know, do you have any talent, do you actually have a vision, you know, and you can kind of like savage your whole existence, and then you have to kind of like write your way out of it, you know. And it was kind of like establishing this kind of, you know, gauntlet for yourself within society, basically turning yourself into your own scapegoat, you know, like that was kind of like the former mode, but that certainly isn't happening anymore. Not where it's. I don't think, and I think it is kind of. It boils down to something as simple as like the practicalities of it. You know, if you want to have a band, you have to have like guitars, amplifiers, a place to rehearse, cables. It's just fucking expensive. You know, like I think if you're a kind of
Yeah.
a SoundCloud rapper or somebody making like avant-garde techno in their bedroom, I think there's things happening in those. You know, if you go like to the clubs in Berlin or whatever, weird shit is going down, you know, people are getting fungal, you know, but like in the kind of rock and roll scene, it's just kind of geriatric from, you know, from bottom to top, you know, it's over. And I guess people have been declaring it over for a long time, you know, but I just feel like it's kind of lost any real vitality, you know. And I think that last thing
Yeah.
of like, I mean, you got to think about it. If there's just nothing in it for people anymore. Not only do people not pay for your music, you know, so you spend all this money making these productions, but you can't live off record sales. That's just a fantasy, you know. And like you're expected to have the kind of moral standing of a kind of mid-level like labor politician or something, you know. You can't have any skeletons in the closet. Your friends can't have any you know, it's like everybody has to be kind of public relations savvy. It's just a fucking nightmare, you know. Like there's no room for
be an operator.
You have to be an operator and you have to say the right
Yeah.
things on the right cues, you know, whereas before it was like, I want to see if I can upset like everybody. How many people can we upset at the same time, and then work back from that, you know? And then you've established like a kind of heroic arc, like automatically, you know. But now it's like that whole thing of like a band being kind of bigger than itself and like mythologizing and all that kind of stuff. It's just not there, you know.
So I mean, like thinking back to kind of your own history with Fat White Family and other kind of musical endeavors that you did, was setting out to be edgy or provocative or confrontational? And I know those are all kind of slightly different things. Was that a goal of yours? I mean, were you self-conscious in terms of what you were trying to achieve by doing that? Or was it a kind of just an instinct of youth to just go, yeah, fuck off?
I think I always had that impulse of like, just kind of exposing myself in some gratuitous way. I think that was there from when I was a child. I remember getting up on a table at school and just pulling my pants down in front of the whole class and just fucking causing trouble or whatever, you know. And I think it's kind of there's an impulse, like I was saying, just a kind of performative kind of thing. But with us, we were in bands before Fat White Family that were, I guess, slightly more pedestrian, and it went absolutely nowhere, you know. And we got to a point where we were kind of we completely reached kind of ground zero in terms of like thinking we had any kind of prospects. And then at that point, we were just purely making things for our own amusement, you know. So that's when the songs, you know, whether it's writing kind of like love letters to Hitler from Goebbels in the bunker or whatever, or Cream of the Young about pederast kind of TV personalities, or, you know, this kind of just like the filth, you know, like anything that kind of that felt like we could like daub the world in the same shit that we felt that it had daubed us in, you know. It was kind of, that was what we were doing. It was our way of taking some small vengeance on reality, you know. It was just this filth, but it was really just for us, you know, and we really didn't have anything even remotely approaching a game plan, or it was just like us, and then we'd go to a pub and then we'd do it there for a bit, and it went on like that for years. But I mean, I guess a lot of the people we were into had followed down that route. I mean, definitely in the kind of DNA, but it was more a natural kind of a progression.
Right. So, I mean, like maybe looking back on it, that delving into a kind of nihilistic shittiness, which obviously like has its appeal when, you know, to put it kind of bluntly, society is increasingly nihilistic and shitty. How does
Yes.
that, how do you see, how do you see that provocation working if it's kind of, there's a certain mirror image, I guess, going on there?
I think it's like, you're just a product of your times, you know what I mean? It's like originality is just like some fabled fucking El Dorado. Like this is forget about it. You know, you are just like a symptom of whatever era you're born into, you know, which is kind of disturbing, you know. It's like that bit about Flaubert in Rings of Saturn, you know, where he's all freaked out about his work because he considers it, you know, it's already so infected by the time he lives in that, you know, he wants to just destroy all of it, you know. And it's kind of like it can almost prevent you from doing anything, you know. But then also the pressure's kind of off. But I think it doesn't make any sense to make things that aren't deeply pathologically, luridly kind of nihilistic. I think if you're young and that's the world, there's no faith in anything, And back then, like it was just after like 2008, and it was like your portion of history is just going to be this like grotesque kind of decline, and it's only gotten worse and worse and worse, more comically awful.
Yeah.
So
I mean, thinking about like the kind of musical context of the 2010s, right? Like, I think at some point in the book 10,000 Apologies, you write that you wanted to make music that was an antidote to all that shit being made in London, and there was a lot of terrible. I mean, particularly like landfill indie, as it was called, was probably the worst of the lot. But I also think that when I think of millennial music, there's a particular sound which is that of what I call like millennial epic. At least that's what I think of it in my head. And probably the crystallization of that, or the kind of pure juice essence of that, would be something like Paradise by Coldplay.
Yeah.
And you can see that song being used in a million different reels and videos on Instagram for advertising like some waterfall or something that you're going to go visit or whatever, for tourism and travel and anything else, right? And I wonder like how you understand that, because like I don't think none of the music you did sounds like it sounded like it was trying to be epic, and how you understand a lot of kind of indie music trying to sound
big,
somehow grand and epic, but incredibly thin and shallow at the same time.
I mean, this is I think you still want to go in. You want to go in for that kind of like widescreen kind of a thing, And there's the kind of like Morricone kind of widescreen. And then there's that kind of like, I don't know, like the way it implores you to kind of like reach forth, reach up, the Coldplay kind of like the enthusiasm in it. It's just kind of fetid, it's like, don't hang your fucking optimism on me, like I don't want it, but I think it's kind of like, no, I think to work at scale like that, I think that's a great thing if you can pull it off, but it's just all the more kind of like oppressive when it's like rooted in just that kind of facile, utterly kind of commercial kind of thing, I mean, it was pretty dark times, but I just think, like I said, it's been dying for a long time, like in the noughties.
Is there anything you particularly hated? Like anything that you just would disgust you profoundly?
I mean, it's easier for me to say whether or not there was anything I didn't find like disgusting. I mean, it was all what was decent. There were a few bands we really liked, from like Country Teasers and The Makeup, and they were kind of more like from the 90s, But in the noughties, there really wasn't much. There was that last flurry of kind of like romance with like Amy Winehouse and the Libertines or whatever, But there was some kind of hackneyed about all of that, And then it was kind of like, I don't know, like the Pitchfork era, with kind of like music as like spreadsheets, decimal places, and these kind of like the musical kind of police, which was just sickening. You either had this kind of utterly generic garbage, whether it's kind of like, I don't know, the Kaiser Chiefs or something, and then you had your kind of like alt super hip kind of like in the know kind of a thing going on, It lost any of that kind of proletarian vitality, any of that kind of knacker vitality. That thing where you start to wear your Arrested Development like a crown was just out, I think that's what bit the dust. But things I found particularly dispiriting, I mean, fucking hell, Coldplay, but Coldplay's just so, it just goes without saying, But it's baffling. You never actually meet anybody who's a Coldplay fan. I've never met anybody that's met anybody that's met anybody. It's like, is it even really a thing? Have you ever been down to the O2 to see if there are actually like 20,000 people down there? Is it actually going on, or is it like a fucking,
You think it's a psyop?
It could be
it's
a psyop
that people.
It could be a psyop.
This is what we're supposed to like. This is what we're supposed to feel. This kind of low key but slightly soaring optimism. I mean, this is obviously not, Fat White Family. That's I think in the book it comes across this kind of, I don't want to say negativity, but like the spirit of like basically saying like these, this culture seems shit, and if there's anything you can do to upset as many people as possible, as you put it, that must be a route out of it, if there is any route out of it. I mean,
Yeah.
at the time were you kind of thinking like, we could, if we blaze a trail here, we could have people follow us? I don't know. It seems like, reflecting back on that period of particularly British musical history is not, could it have
Well,
been otherwise? Probably not.
I think it was kind of like, it was really sort of, I didn't realize how kind of dead all that kind of carry on was, But then when kind of Trump got in around that time, the great awakening, and everybody became kind of hyper kind of sensitive. And there was this real change that happened very quickly. It was like amazing how kind of like, how out of sync it was with all that, and how kind of unthinkable that kind of carry on would now be for a younger band coming through. You just wouldn't get a look in now with any of that kind of carry on, we just can't afford the ambiguity. And that's coming back to that thing of it, art and culture just being utterly like kind of patronizing, it's like everybody's too stupid, we can't risk it, because we were really kind of, it was the 2010s and it was kind of all happening. And then suddenly we were kind of like, I think certain quarters kind of turned on the band, and I think it was kind of like we were these kind of malevolent, we were this malevolent energy or whatever, and now it's kind of like too easy to be provocative, it's just easy mode, like everybody's been nudged into that.
That's a good point. It makes even the provocateurs not have to work off all that hard to kind of poke at something.
There's
to provoke a
nobody.
reaction.
There's nobody to compete with, So it's just like, I mean, I had a thing. I went to meet the record label a few weeks ago to talk about this new single we've just put out called "Bullet of Dignity," and it's like there's nothing in there, there's no pseudo-fascist stuff or any kind of like anything particularly perverse. I mean, in the thing, but I'm in a meeting at Domino Records, and there's like 8 people in there, the plugger and the art people, and they're like, so with the radio, they might not, they might just call it Dignity, and I was like, why, and they were like, oh, because of the word bullet, and I was like, what do you mean, and they were like, well, the war, and I was just like, what do you mean the war? Like, what the fuck, But I mean, in the end, they just called it Bullet of Dignity on the radio, so we didn't have that problem. But there were like 8 adults, people with like mortgages, like people with professional people in a room in London having this discussion about whether or not somebody up north at Radio 6 or whatever was going to say the word. But and it's just like, one, it's a fucking waste of time, but 2, like, where is the fucking line if that's even on the table for discussion? Like, it's just it's.
And if you're in the middle of a war, if there was in the middle of a war, no one would be like squeamish about saying the word bullet, because it'd be very real and present around you. I mean, if you're in the middle of an actual war, not distant wars, right?
But what about the word dignity? Isn't that kind of like assisted suicide? That could be a bit problematic. Just call it of. Just call the just refer to it as of.
You get to that
in
point,
fact, take out all the words other than kind of prepositions and articles. Just make it easier that way.
It's just commas and semicolons, and that's
just punctuation.
Just punctuation, which is kind of sort of where we're going, I guess. In a kind of terrifying way. Because I don't know. I just think to myself, if I was willing to kind of like wander around on stage, with fucking 2 fingers at my own arse, covered in feces, screaming about like, kiddie love. What like, and I'm now kind of like second guessing even the slightest fucking thing when I go to like write a lyric or make a video or whatever. I'm worried. What are like 21-year-olds who want to make it their way in music and kind of like Because it's like you're forever putting ideas just that are ever so slightly outre, like on the shelf, because you're like, well, I've got rent to pay, like reality, the practicalities of everything. Like, you got to try and keep the people at the radio sweet, you got to stay on side with the label and everybody else, and you want to get booked or you don't get, because it's like the walls are pressing in because there's no record sales, like. So you got this twin thing, on one hand, like you can't do anything, and on the other hand, like you got to get by. It's just a recipe for endless like beige,
I mean, there's a kind of irony, I think, in it, insofar as, like a lot of pop culture in kind of the general sense, but rock in particular, kind of pushing at those boundaries, being provocative, right? And those old like blue-haired ladies who were shocked and whatever, or the kind of Christian conservative reaction, that slowly kind of died away. And I think there was a period of some sort of genuine freedom in the probably maybe in the 90s, early 2000s or something, before the emergence of the new political correctness of wokeness and whatever, but after the old conservatism had died off. And maybe that period was actually difficult because there was nothing really to push against. The kind of whole modernist project is about pushing it against tradition. Tradition had kind of gone away. Now we have very much something to push against, right? Have a kind of a very restrictive and conformist climate, but it doesn't seem to be more productive of kind of creativity or has the grounds for invention.
It's because there's no conservatives. There's nobody who's really trying to defend what's there. Instead, it would be a kind of probably younger. It's not like the adult, parents' generation or grandparents saying like, I don't understand this. This must be bad. It's people who are, who are young, who are probably have kind of hyper liberal values. That's where there's no kind of this like reservoir of like attitudes to be shocked, like upholding decency. I mean, I might be exaggerating a bit here, but it does seem
that's
like
where
a lot of the conformity comes from the bottom up, not the top down or whatever.
Yeah, that's definitely been my impression in the last. But then you got that thing where what are you going to accidentally wander into kind of, because it's like liberal and it's on the left or whatever, that's where you feel like there's this kind of oppressively censorious kind of like vibe, it's like, forget about the other side or whatever. But what do? You accidentally sort of like wander into like a far more conservative kind of, what are you going to like become a Christian just to stick it to the wokes or whatever? I don't know what's the kind of
right.
What's the tactic there? It's kind of like I don't know how you get around that one, But it was a really sudden and shocking kind of turn of events that I didn't really see coming, Didn't think so.
But I think that is. But that is a conundrum, right? I mean, I guess, you don't want to just be provocative for its own sake, but if you want to kind of push against things, from what position do you do that? If the liberalism has been kind of wholly swallowed up by the wokeness, and then the alternative is some anti-woke being Christian to like own the libs or something, which some people are doing, but it's pretty silly. But I want to talk about kind of conformity in general terms, not just in regard to the woke thing, which has been kind of endlessly discussed. But I wonder how you would characterize conformity more broadly today, because I think, to put it the other way around, to flip it around, the typical countercultural attitude of recent years has been to kind of point at things like shopping malls or the gentrified high streets that George mentioned earlier, and chain pubs and stuff, and to kind of stand against that. But there always seems to be a little bit of a sneering at the people who populate these places that goes along with that. So I wonder how you understand that attempt to kind of stand against that conformity, but if you see that risk of kind of being kind of anti-masses in that attempt to be not conformist.
Yeah, it's a weird one. I think that's kind of boils down probably to a question of like class. I think it's like that kind of one size fits all shopping malls and all the rest of it. It's kind of like, I definitely get the thing like the sneering thing. You don't want to wind up sneering. I think that happens a lot. I think it's kind of even with like people taking pride in their country or something like that. It's like easy to kind of like rip the piss out of that.
Right. Yeah.
I think that often happens, although I'm no stranger to it myself. But I don't know, like it's 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 more like everybody's kind of siloed into different portions, I guess. Like online, that's why when I think about conformity now, I just think it's kind of like people aren't really left or right at all. It's some simulacrum of those things based on whatever wormhole they've fallen down, whatever the algorithmic gods have designated their role in this kind of pretend game of like politics or whatever. And I guess how you kind of unsilo yourself, how you get out of like one mindset or the other, how you remain kind of like in between camps and independent of mind.
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah, so it's like
kind
not
of
the
like,
old conformity of the mainstream high street, but a kind of now new kind of social media digital conformity of yeah, as you
yeah,
say, kind of yeah,
like it's gone
algorithmically
from,
managed conformity.
yeah. So it's gone. So yeah, the shopping mall is kind of the inside of your head, and you pick off a certain like point of view or a certain taste in this kind of thing, and it's like, and then yeah, you end up being one thing or it's inversion, and it's kind of like, yeah, like when people end up kind of like anti woke or whatever, it's like I saw like the Ricky Gervais thing on Netflix the other day, and it was just like he'd just become the same thing as what he was criticizing, and it just wasn't that funny. It wasn't like particularly original. It's just sort of like stepped into that kind of predetermined role, and I don't know. I guess it's kind of like the technology is so impossibly kind of manipulative and powerful and all consuming, that it's just like remodeling people on this scale where it's like, how do you how do you take up some kind of a vantage point with that? Loads of drugs maybe might be a good place to start.
Yeah, I mean, we had an episode recently on contemporary art, and we talked. Our guest was explaining to us about how there's a kind of turn to the mystical and the magical, and a kind of anti-rational turn. Now, I don't want to say that makes it sound like before that art was rational, and which was kind of would be to do down kind of what art is, or somehow reduce it. But nevertheless, that there's a kind of turn towards the exotic or the indigenous, and necessarily the magical and whatever, from kind of Western artists, and there's something weird going on there.
Hmm.
And I kind of that kind of made me think a little bit. Maybe that's where things are going. I don't find that to be any less conformist, incidentally, in my view, because these are elite cultural institutions and curators and whatever who are going and
Yeah.
finding in kind of indigenous people something mystical and outside of Western civilization, which I think is in a large degree a mirage. But I wonder if that's the way that things are going, and if you've encountered kind of these trends yourself, or if you have any feelings on it yourself.
Yeah, I've definitely kind of come across that kind of a sensibility. I think while drugs are kind of in their decline amongst the general population, I think within certain intellectual circles and culturally, there's a kind of newfound interest in stuff like psychedelics. But from that kind of like searching for some kind of higher truth, as opposed to just casual, rave kids getting out of their heads in the weekend. It's become this kind of almost like people study it and they're looking for something there, which I think has certain kind of validity. But I think some push towards the mystic kind of makes sense as a kind of reaction to all that, to sort of like de-spreadsheet your soul,
Mm.
by like, I don't know, like incantation and hallucination and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I've always been deeply embroiled in that, and I've always kind of like, I don't know. I guess when you smash a load of acid or DMT or whatever, it's difficult not to it's difficult to remain cynical about like the kind of your metaphysical kind of reality. Like it's kind of, there is something in all that kind of almost limit experience, I think, new kind of a new plane of sensuality or whatever. But I think the flip side of that is kind of like, for me, has been spending time in North Africa and Algeria. My family live in the mountains of Kabyle. They're Berbers, so it's incredibly simple. and their life is completely different. There's no drink, no drugs, any of that kind of stuff. But it's all rooted in its own kind of mysticism, I guess, and like patience and gratitude. And it's almost like the same thing. It's just learning to kind of appreciate reality, either through like abstinence or absolute kind of exposure to extreme sensuality. There's some kind of like they both meet in some way. But I've found that's kind of like those are like useful technologies. I think ritual and storytelling and all that kind of stuff. But I think the hallucinogenic experience is kind of, I don't know. I don't feel too cynical about that. I think that's at the root of so much kind of culture.
But I mean, it's interesting. I don't disagree. I don't know how much of that there is there, because although I say I made reference to kind of contemporary art being engaged in the magical and particularly the indigenous, for me it sounds more like less a freewheeling exploration of the psyche and imagination, and more a search for authenticity. A kind of, it reflects a certain kind of alienated Western sensibility and an attempt to find who the true, good, authentic people are there, who are the good rooted victims against us alienated Western rationalists who are trampling over their culture. So I don't see that much of the hallucinogenic imaginative side, and a lot more of the kind of crisis of modernity, kind of, a search for authenticity, I think.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's one, but I mean, that's kind of, I guess
So let me. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to maybe rephrase it as a question rather than just kind of lobbing random thoughts.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
What I was going to say is like in your comments, it's nice that you went and mentioned Algeria, because I wanted to kind of bring that in as well. You write positively about things like the intergenerational support network, a slower pace of life, and so on. But you've also written positively about Ivan Illich in a recent piece in Unheard, which is interesting because there does seem to be a recent revival of interest in Illich.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you wanted to comment on that.
I think it's that thing. I think like technological excess. I think a lot of this boils down to, I think when we look back at like the noughties as this kind of halcyon time, and the 90s is this kind of almost mythically halcyon time, all the way back to the 60s, where it was some kind of Olympian kind of paradise in terms of like culture and what was happening and everything. Then the immediate conclusion is just like you've been smothered just with these new communications devices and everything, and industrial kind of capitalism is just like overrun everything. And I think the final point of that is where people begin to like actually reflect the machine, and the machine begins to kind of mold them. And I guess with Illich, that's kind of the whole thing. And how you kind of decouple from that, is that even possible, But there was so much stuff in there I found really kind of like resonated with our particular kind of like vacuity that we're lost in today, where it's like hard to know your own thoughts, hard to even define things, like what is like conformity, and it's like it's just so kind of like it's so kind of beyond like, I don't know, your phone is just like this fucking devil magic kind of infinite, impossible kind of thing. It's smarter and bigger than you, it's got your fucking...
I like how you made the comparison in something you wrote about, kind of voices in your head, that the phone and social media particularly, just inserts these voices into your head. You're arguing with people online and then you turn off your phone, but they're still talking to you. And the comparison you made between that and kind of, cannabis-induced psychosis. And to a certain extent, that's the psychosis, I guess, of our day is more induced by social media, than by drugs.
But it's it's this kind of technological excess. It definitely fills the gap, and it does it with a lot of skill in a way. Like smartphone designed to take up your attention and to engage you, it does that extremely well. And your point, Lias, about like spreadsheets in the soul. I mean, this kind of it can feel like that. I guess the tools that we have are to manage certain aspects of our life, but if there's no meaning behind that, you're left with the spreadsheets, and what they actually contain is sort of neither here nor there. So I mean, I definitely think, put all these things together and you can see people reaching for Illich and kind of anything that sort of it takes a critical perspective on some aspects of modernity and technology, and particularly highlights the ways in which those technologies, without any reason behind them, can come to
Yeah.
distort us and dominate in a range of different ways.
Yeah, like his thing is the solution to the problem is always more of the problem, and that's like
Yeah.
your phone, like to a T, But it's like I've just noticed myself, like the kind of workaholic it turns you into, where you're like, you're having a shit, which should be a bit of tranquility, a bit of personal time, maybe read a magazine or something, but you're there doing a little bit of emailing, you're just pinging that thing off to so and so and attach that document. And it's just like you're constantly at work, you're constantly trying to hook things up or whatever. But like the metrics, on everything, it's like even with music, Spotify, you get an exact number of plays on the thing that you've just like spent like 2 years making or whatever. And it's like, I don't care about that, but I can't help but log on to Spotify and see exactly how many plays the thing has had, and is it the right amount of plays? And so who I used to work with, who was booked, he's got this many plays and she's got that many plays, and you're just within this kind of like constellation of like metrics, and you can't help but like adhere to it in some small way because you're just too weak. You need the kind of like affirmation and the acknowledgement or the lack of it, so
Happens
you can
to
push yourself even
podcasters too. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's brutal. It's brutal. It's like
So
comments threads. They should just get rid of that shit.
So just a question on this, because it's like, I guess the perception might be that like if you're a musician, like you kind of, I don't know, you rise above this, or you kind of play for the crowd, and you don't count them individually. It's kind of that escape from the kind of the 9 to 5. This is not about my current employer, that kind of soul crushing 9 to 5 kind of job, office job that you might have. It's like it's an escape from that. It's the opposite. It's a kind of it's a realm of like experience and kind of reaching towards art, and particularly performing live. That's something transformative and different. But it sounds like the kind of managed quantified life is creeping into that. I think like
everything.
How can you not check the number of plays that a song, a single comes
I
out
mean,
on Spotify?
It always was like that. I mean, it was. I think it doesn't matter who you are. Like, it doesn't matter which artist. You're always keeping one eye on the size of the venue and the amount of people that are buying tickets or whatever. It's always been a thing, but it hasn't been like broken down to these kind of pitchforky and fucking decimal points all over the shop. Where you can just get the minutiae of absolutely everything. You can be moderating it and streamlining it. A bit more over here, and it's just like. It's just all mystery, just gone, So yeah, it's no wonder people are kind of, heading back towards the mystic and the irrational. I think that makes sense. I guess it might be just another narcissistic kind of deviation, but people have to try something. I guess.
Right. I guess it's also, I guess, about spaces where things are created, right? Because it seems to me that there's very few people now, and we're prevented from just kind of creating for its own sake, going about doing our thing, beavering away, whether it's music or writing or pottery or whatever the hell it is. Then you might take it public, right? Then you might introduce it to the public, and I think things are public before they're even fully formed. Right, that there's an imperative to perform, to like put it on social media to show people, or even in terms of the content, to make it have a statement already. So it's not like, oh, I'm just making this. I don't know what I'm going to do pottery because that's the example like my brain threw at me, and we're going to run with that. But I'm making this pottery, and maybe I'm just making it because I want to make a beautiful cup. Instead, it's like, no, this cup needs to say something about the oppression of the Palestinians or something. And it's like, no, it doesn't. You can just make a nice thing, And so there's this like immediate publicness and spectacular aspect to every thing. And I think that makes it quite hard, I would imagine, for artists to produce quietly, because to a certain extent, you do need to be kind of doing, kind of working away, beavering away
I
at your
think
own thing in quiet.
yeah, being ignored for a lengthy period of time is like crucial to an artist's development. That's when people get tough. That's when they refine. And I see that a lot on like the music scene in London, where you get like young bands who have the right angles, whether it's like the identity thing or the angle, and you see like a record label will swoop in and put them on that machine and the treadmill, and it's all operating, and they know the whole system. They haven't been left in like kind of just horrible obscurity to sort of like develop a point of view that anybody like that's worth hearing, because everything is immediately public and it's infinite. The photos, the videos from the gigs, it's all, there is no kind of shadow zone that you have to kind of crawl out of. Everything is kind of is there right away, and that's kind of, again, it's kind of horrific. There really isn't enough kind of
What,
darkness.
what
And
would have
you're
happened
and
with your
you're
yeah? What would have happened
and
with
then
your band if it had been, not whatever 2011, but it'd been 2021 or something?
I think we would just never have gotten a look in. No record label would ever have taken a punt on that, because it's just like, these people are problematic in every single way imaginable, and none of the songs have a particularly kind of commercial appeal. And I just don't think it would have happened. I don't think anybody would have taken any kind of a chance on it. But it grew up. Our first label, it was a tiny, tiny, tiny independent. I mean, people did ignore it anyway, actually. When it was 2011 or whatever, it was a tiny, tiny independent label. It was no money or anything like that. And it just grew of its own accord. It became like a kind of scene thing, until they couldn't really kind of ignore it any longer. But I don't know. I guess it would just, I think they'd kill it before it could grow, You'd be some cancellation fiasco or some fucking thing. I don't know, Something would have gone wrong. I don't think the ecosystem's there to support it anymore. And I don't really see anybody coming up in our tracks with that kind of like just pour shit on everything kind of attitude. It just doesn't seem to happen anymore. It's like edge lording. You're not allowed to make a living edge lording anymore. It's forbidden. It's naughty. It's off the table. Those days are done.
Well, I mean, I think even back then, I mean, I remember Fat White Family catching my eye precisely because it did that in a context in which there were few bands out there who were. And it made it kind of a much more intriguing proposition than a lot of the stuff that was out there. Even stuff that I liked musically, but it certainly wasn't doing that. So, no,
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. And I mean, you kind of already mentioned that the capacity for sort of autonomy and then for like artistic creation, the material basis for that is, not there anymore in terms of being able to live cheaply and rent, as well as all the
Yeah.
questions of cancel culture and being overexposed on social media and all the rest of it. And I wonder, like, your band very much identified as like, okay, a South London band coming out of like a squad and whatever. I mean, that's what the kind of I mean, it's the story that is told in your book, but it's also, the stuff that the label, I guess, puts on marketing literature. You're right. Like, you're from this, right? It's like, but
Yeah.
it's a London band. And we always expected, I think, normally that, bands like that would come from big cities. And it seems like big cities make that increasingly impossible. They are not able to germinate or, get fungal, to use your delightful expression. Do you see something interesting coming from the provinces, from like unfashionable small or mid-sized cities, some of the places maybe you grew up even, that nowadays that they might actually be places where interesting things are happening in a way that London does not provide for that?
I think I think it's kind of there'll always be stuff coming out of the north of England, I'm guessing. I think people come out of the small towns, but they go to the city, and that's where they kind of like congeal and find that's where you go and find the other oddballs. I think from the sticks or whatever. But that whole process, that kind of melting pot thing, yeah, inevitably that gets less and less and less likely. I think especially in London, because it's particularly kind of brutal, in terms of like its size and the rent. I think if you live in like Walthamstow and you live in
yeah.
Clapham, you might as well be in a different fucking country, you know, like it's you're too far away, you know, the network is too spread out wide, you know, for things to centralize and for there to be kind of hot spots, you know. Like, I mean, all of the venues have just kind of died off. Like in Brixton, there used to be so many like greasy little venues, you know. Now there's just like one, and it's busy every single night of the week, and the record labels are always in there, and it's like, you know, that's the end. Your ecosystem has just shrunk down to basically nothing, you know. But yeah, the small town. I mean, I guess that's the thing. The technology's there, isn't it, to reach out and to kind of do things like in a kind of decentralized way. But then the technology also just implores everything, you know, everybody to be exactly the same and to get in line, you know, and also to feel really negative about themselves. You know, that's the thing with the mad metrics. You know, it just induces this feeling of like, you know, horrible inadequacy. You know, it's like the same with when you're trying to write an essay about something. You know, before the internet, you know, you couldn't just type in like a name and find 10 essays on that subject and then start reading. You know, you'd be none the wiser, you know, so you wouldn't know how good or bad you are potentially writing this essay, you know. But now you kind of like, you've immediately got like a whole litany of things that make you feel like inferior, like at your fingertips, you know. So you're kind of like damning yourself all the time.
Yeah, I guess the tenor of the discussion so far has been sort of negative, and not to be too, I don't know, apologetic about that, but it's not a good segue. But anyway, the book, to return to that, is called 10,000 Apologies. And one thing I was thinking as I was reading it was like, who are the apologies to, and for what? Because there's a lot of, I guess you could call it euphemistically, kind of bad behavior in there. There's some antics on stage and off stage, but like the ethos seems to be not like no apologies for any behavior, but like, here is an attempt, you know, to kind of do some of that punk kind of aesthetic of dissonance and dissidence, and kind of, you know, push the boundaries a little bit. So yeah, just a question I had as reading it. Who are the apologies to, and why are there 10,000 of them?
I think I think of the 10,000 as being kind of internal apologies within the group.
Right.
I feel like that's what, you know, I don't think those were meant for anybody out there. I think the book generally was more of a kind of like a qualification maybe of things, you know, but I don't feel like, I feel if anything, people owe us something, you know. I don't feel sorry, you know, but within the group, I think there was such kind of inconsistencies, morally, you know, member to member, that, it just became comical, you know. But I think this is who would be a musician now. I think the thing is, like, you could be like killing each other, you know, like you'd be fucking really at each other's throats, you know, like actually physically going at one another, and you would hate each other to the point of like fantasizing about killing each other or whatever, you know. It would go all the way to the depths, the bowels of hatred, you know. And then you'd go up and you'd play a show, and then you'd come off and you'd just be like long lost brothers again, and all was forgotten, you know. It's like this esprit de corps that takes hold when you actually get into performance and touring in that life, that's just absolutely unlike any other kind of experience. It's just like, and if you combine it with a load of drugs at the same time, you're on some like Elysian realm, you know, experientially, you know. And it's like, it's amazing the capacity for forgiveness in that moment, you know. Like you become a kind of like, you become like tolerance, like defined, you know, like you will put up with anything from each other. And then the darkness will roll around again, you know, and then the shows are over, you know. And there's this thing like, where do you go when the shows are over? Where do these men go? You know, what do they do? You know, and they harangue and torture each other in the darkness, you know, and they do their shitty drugs, and until it's ready for them, you know, until the bat symbol goes up on the lamp again, and they go out and they do it all over again, you know. But who would become a musician? I don't know. I couldn't really advise it. You know, I think if your thing is kind of in any way kind of strike a kind of anarchic kind of chord in the culture, I think it's lost much of its kind of. You can still do it, but you can't do it while also scraping a living together. I think you've got more chance blogging or podcasting, or, you know, I think the written word has far more kind of anarchic kind of potential, because it's like you just need nothing to do it. You can do it with a laptop, and that's it. You don't need a team, you don't need a place to rehearse. You can really get, that's it. Like, I think now you're just doomed to like the absolute fringes, and it rots your brain doing that thing every single night. Your whole life boils
Mm.
down to just 1 hour, and the rest of your life is just dead weight. You're just getting through it. It's just service stations, travel lodges, and masturbation. There is no life. And that you don't
Yeah.
cultivate any particularly like worthwhile knowledge or perception of the world living like that. But I mean, if you absolutely
Yeah.
have to have like that kind of like extreme, if you have to have your ego gratified in that kind of a way, you're just going to do it anyway, even if it's really bad for you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're compelled to do it, you'll do it whether it's a good idea or not. I guess there was a spate of articles a few years ago now that was like podcasts are the new punk because you just like set out with a few microphones and this sort of thing. And I don't know, some of the things that you said with a much like vastly reduced kind of intensity do seem to apply to podcasting to an extent. Like you perform to a certain
Well,
extent
it
and you have
was,
little arguments and that, but I mean, I
yeah.
guess it's live, and that is the define or previously the defining thing about music is it has to be experienced with people in up there on the stage and people in the audience, and that must be is that sufficient buzz to kind of
To ruin your life.
offset everything else though in your life. I mean, you
Um,
did it and you kept doing it and you're still doing it now. So I guess this is,
yeah,
yeah.
I'm always pouring like cold water on it. But yeah, I guess I'll know when I'm done. Like Forrest Gump running backwards and forwards across America. Like eventually I'm finished now. But I think it's kind of like, I don't know, it's just the most visceral kind of experience that. But I just think as a kind of cultural mode, I don't know. Like coming back to that thing about Flaubert thinking that all of his work was already kind of like infected by the contemporary morality that he was mired in, and that he should just get rid of it all. I think it's like that. I just think you've got no hope of actually kind of like the guys that kind of got you, the people like that led you to form a band in the first place. Your idols, the heroes from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. These people are kind of like the divine inspiration. That's not an option for you. Your brain has already malformed in a way that that level of freedom is impossible for you now. It's like and it will only seem more so as time rolls on, the further we roll down the mountain, like the impossible heights that were scaled in that kind of golden era will only seem more impossible and only actually become more impossible. It was just a particular moment. So you are kind of like an imitation of an imitation of an imitation. It's like an echo, like a I think you have to just take on board that that's basically you are the dregs of this kind of cultural moment. But the real party is somewhere else now. It doesn't matter how much you love Lou Reed, like you just can't get down on that kind of a level because it's not there anymore.
I mean, it is quite disquieting to think. I've thought about it before, like pop culture and particularly rock music is something that existed from 1955 to 1995 or whatever.
Yeah,
And that it's over. And then like historians will look back and be like, oh yeah, this was the thing that happened. And it was really important to a lot of people. And it was
yeah,
the soundtrack to people's lives and blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't exist anymore. And that's quite disquieting because it's something that we've taken so for granted and such an integral part of kind of the experience of being modern, living in the
yeah,
modern world. But that was a big part of it, right? It was soundtracked. Not
yeah,
having that is weird. And I'm not even comfortable with it now and how little music I listen to relative to what I did and how central it was to my life. So
yeah,
despite that, right. So I wanted to kind of to round this out. And you've got a new album coming out in April,
yeah.
and you had the experience of your third album being very well received, and then the big tour around it being interrupted, as so much else
Mm.
was, by the pandemic. And now it's kind of 2024 and you're coming around to releasing a new album. So you haven't kind of given up the ghost in that regard, at least. So I don't know if you want to talk through what's in the album, if there's an idea behind it, what or maybe the process of producing it in this context.
I think the thing was, like, the pandemic was a really good thing for some people, and for other people it was a really, really terrible thing. For me, it was kind of like rehab or something. I never considered myself far gone enough with drugs to go and have rehab and therapy and shit. Things never got that dramatically awful for me personally. So I was able to start writing, and that was kind of like therapizing myself or whatever. And I calmed down a lot in those years and stopped kind of like fucking my head up quite as much as I got some perspective. But for people in music generally, it was a complete disaster. For so many of the people I work with and that I know, it was like their entire world was just kind of like obliterated. I think if you like to write or you make podcasts or you study or whatever, the pandemic was kind of like a gift in so many ways. You had no more distraction, all this time to think. But within the group, it set us rolling in very kind of different directions psychologically. And it's like that. The center will not hold, and it didn't, and there was some real catastrophic fallouts. There was a lot of infighting, worse than before. So the whole thing has kind of just been like trying to work out some kind of new way of working. A lot of it's kind of contingency, but I always thought of the group as basically just, the group is about the group, it's just this kind of never ending fucking soap opera, So that's always what the thing is about, But this time it just got like, it got to a point of like inanity and resentment that was truly kind of testing, with the interrelational kind of stuff, So it was hard, and I guess that's what it's about, surviving yourself in some way, But yeah, that's about it, It's hard for me. I guess you make the thing so you don't have to explain it to a certain extent, But I would say, yeah, the overarching aesthetic themes are torpor and further torpor still, and that's about it.
Excellent. So, but you're not outraged about Margot Robbie not being nominated for Best Actress for her performance in the Barbie movie?
Oh, definitely. There's all that kind of stuff in there, like I found that just, I just couldn't handle it, But I think trying to strike a chord with those guys. I think track 3, we've got a track called "Polygamy is Only for the Chief," which is kind of, it's on that kind of wavelength, that Margot Robbie kind of, definitely, You got to hit those big issues, there's big dollar in the big issues.
The big dollar, yeah.
On the algorithm to recommend, if you enjoyed Barbie original soundtrack, you might like Fat White Family. That's how to do it.
You might enjoy this. Yeah. No, we've got some really commercial stuff on there. I got like the story of my big brother's circumcision, like a spoken word narrative piece. He had it done when he was 5 in Algeria, like the old way, with no anesthetic or anything. So I thought that was a kind of blow to hit my father with, make sure I get taken off the will and everything. So yeah, I've tried to make it kind of, personal, but also kind of universal,
Great stuff. Right, Lias, this has been a lot of fun. You're welcome back at any time. Good luck with the new record, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, guys. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.